and welcome to the hashtag Here to Hear Keeping It 100 podcast. My name is Damon Naylor, and I'm serving as your host. I'm the membership enhancement facilitator for NAFCM, and I'm joined by my co-host, DG Mon, the president of NAFCM. What's up, DG?
Hey Damon, how are you doing? Good to be here
Ah,
with you.
man, I am great. I'm blessed, just happy to be in the land of the living, and just so excited about us coming together to have another dynamic conversation with a great guest. What about
Me
you?
too. I'm happy to be having a roof over my head. I hear we're going to talk about that tonight and some work being done to make sure other people are similarly blessed with roofs over their heads. Is that right?
That is right. That is correct. Today,
Uh-uh.
you guys, we have a wonderful guest with us, Jim Alrutz, out of Chicago, Illinois. Jim is the programs director of the Early Resolution Program at the Center for Conflict Resolution. And without further ado, we're going to bring in Jim.
Go Chi-Town.
There we go.
Hello, Jim, and welcome. We just gave the audience a little brief introduction of who you are at this moment, and this at this time, you can tell them anything you would like to know about you.
Great. Well, first off, Damon, DG, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. My name is Jim Alrutz, he, him, his. I'm the programs director for the Early Resolution Program at the Center for Conflict Resolution. The Early Resolution Program is part of a broader program called Cook County Legal Aid for Housing and Debt. And that program is a partnership between the county, the city of Chicago, the Circuit Court of Cook County, and a number of different legal aid organizations to help parties who are facing eviction and consumer debt cases in Cook County get connected to free legal advice, mediation services, in the case of evictions, to rental assistance, with the goal being to help parties be able to resolve their conflicts a little bit faster than what might happen otherwise through the court system, and certainly to help parties who are not represented by attorneys be able to access the system better, whether that's through getting legal advice or through participating in a mediation, so that they can get access to justice without needing to learn the intricacies of the court system, and hopefully being able to have people who are in dispute work out their problems themselves and then go back to court and say, Judge, we don't need you anymore. We've got this figured out.
Awesome, awesome. Well, it sounds like you guys are doing a great work there. And of course, tonight we want to look at the use of community mediation in Cook County eviction cases. And thinking about this time of year, I'm very curious to know, what is the current status of evictions in Cook County? Are the cases really high right now? Do you see, what is the trend, especially during this time of year?
Sure. So I think that there is a little bit of trend that can be based upon the time of year, but I also think that eviction filings, especially since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the massive amount of impact that had on landlords and on tenants, that we're seeing cases at a point where the filings at least are around where they were before the pandemic began. And what that translates into in terms of amount of cases that even get referred into our program is we end up taking a few hundred referrals. Maybe it's closer to around 150 to 200 every week, the majority of which come from the city of Chicago, but there's 6 courthouses in Cook County, and we staff virtual courtrooms in all of them. And so we do get referrals from throughout suburban Cook County as well. Once a case gets referred to us, then it's given a status date in court, and it's time for the parties to speak to legal aid, to speak to mediation services if they're interested in it. And the amount of cases that actually go from being referred to us to a scheduled mediation is certainly lower than the overall amount, because there are times where the parties don't want to talk to each other. They have a relationship that is so contentious that a mediation might not be effective. It may be that one of the parties is a business entity that's represented by an attorney, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's inherently a bad fit for mediation, but the attorney might say, I would rather just speak to the tenant directly. I don't want to use the vehicle of mediation as a way to do that. It might be that they are willing to do it, and we do schedule mediations where one party is an attorney and one is self-represented. But when we are looking at those cases that are getting referred into us, there's a few different points, whether it's the initial contact with one of our case managers, whether it's after they get a chance to speak to legal aid and say, now that I have a better understanding of my situation, I think I'd like to try mediation. And the resolution rate of cases that are referred to our program is sitting right now at, I believe it's around 27%. And that's the overall rate of cases referred into the program being settled. So not all of those cases are referred to mediation. The settlement rate of eviction mediations is closer to 50%, which is about what we would expect to see from a community mediation program somewhere else in the country, using a facilitative model, which I know we're going to talk about a little more later in this process. And so I think that speaks to the fact that when we're referring cases to mediation, both our case managers and our legal aid partners are trying to do a good job of assessing whether the case will benefit from a facilitative mediation, especially if the parties have some kind of relationship they want to preserve or things like that. And so to the bigger question of kind of the state of those evictions, because we have that many cases that are pouring in every day, it does mean that there's a little bit of that pause while parties are accessing these resources. And if they don't resolve the case through these resources immediately, when they come back to work for their status date, they're put on a schedule to eventually go to trial. Sometimes the parties, after they've been referred to us, will still resolve their case before it ends up going to trial. But once the case is moved on, our legal aid partners might still be involved in the case, depending on the level of representation that they're giving. But at CCR, once the case has left the ERP courtroom, we usually don't hear about it unless the parties reach back out to us to try to schedule or reschedule a mediation.
Awesome, awesome. So basically, from what you stated, you've kind of returned to the same place you were before the pandemic. Because I would assume that during the pandemic there was a decline because of all of the modifications that were being made for people with their homes during that time. But yes, and so I know you have to have a passion for this type of work. I'm more than sure, right? Just being able to, it seems like a really powerful mission to helping people, to stay in their homes and to make it instead of having, like you said, to go through the legal system. So I believe it's a mission and a calling for people to do that. Would you agree with that?
I think I would. I think that one of the things that is distinct about serving in the professional neutral capacity of being a mediator or case managing mediation is it does help to create a little bit of distance from the cases, because even though our case managers are doing intake with people who are in the situation every day, I think, or at least we try to create a culture that helps avoid getting too much burnout, because there is that sense of, if you're doing work like this, certainly it's possible that you might be able to do something that is a little less demanding or possibly more lucrative. And I do think that we have a team that believes in that mission of being able to create access to a system that wouldn't be there otherwise. But I do think that at CCR, we are positioned a little bit differently than some of our legal aid partners, because I don't have to lose sleep at night over whether or not a motion is being filed timely or if opposing counsel is going to get back to me. And so I don't say that to devalue the work that we're doing at CCR, but also to give plenty of due credit to all the hard work that our legal aid partners are doing. I'm certainly a believer in trying to make sure that my team is able to unplug when they are done with work a day. And when 5 o'clock rolls around, I want all of them to be off Slack, be off their computers, and go take care of themselves so that they can then show up at work the next day and feel rejuvenated enough to continue to do this difficult work.
So yes, it's definitely necessary to have that balance, because it's definitely emotional as well. Emotional struggle there, having to deal with the clients and the high stress and anxiety. So what are you guys actually doing, as far as the community mediation to resolve these eviction disputes? Give us some examples of how you're using a mediation, to do that, community mediation to do that.
Sure. So I spoke to this a little bit earlier, that part of the reason that CCR is the case management entity for this program is because having our staff, who are all trained as mediators, be that first point of contact means we have people who are deeply familiar with the process and might be able to assess early on whether or not parties should be encouraged to consider a referral to mediation. And unlike some comparable diversion programs, a referral into our program is not a court order to mediate. It is an opportunity to access mediation as one of several resources, but the parties are not required to go through mediation before they can proceed on with the case. And I know that there are other programs in the country that handle things differently. And so our goal is to find those parties who seem like they would be interested in mediation, especially when we get an opportunity to use some mediation techniques like reality testing to speak to the parties and say, how long is it going to be that you have to go through this court process before a judge is going to grant you an eviction order? Would you be interested in trying to work things out in the meantime, knowing that even if you don't, your case is still on track to go to a trial? But if you get an agreement in mediation, that could be put in place and you might have a resolution faster than what court is going to give you, especially for those parties who are not as familiar with the court process. And so finding those people, talking to them about the process, making sure they have an understanding of what their time in mediation would look like, what their options are going to be for getting that resolution. And then ultimately it's up to the parties whether or not they want to make use of that resource. But I think especially for those parties or those cases where both sides are self-represented, where they might be speaking to legal aid, but they don't have anybody showing up in court for them. I think that a lot of parties in those situations are interested in at least trying to work things out. And one of the things that I think our legal aid partners really help with is setting up the parties for success in mediation so that they can come in with a better understanding of their own needs and interests. They can come in with, some kind of achievable goal and a willingness to discuss that with the other party so that they are actually having the conversation that we want them to have, as opposed to coming in and saying, I don't really know what's going on. I've never been in a situation like this. They hopefully come in with more information so that they're better prepared to have that conversation.
Awesome. DG, did you have any questions you wanted to ask you?
I do, but first I want to hear a little bit more about this facilitative mediation that you do. And then I do have just a few questions, but I don't want to take our time with those. I'd rather hear first about that, if that's okay.
Sure, and I can try to be as brief as possible with the explanation while still being thorough. So within the facilitative mediation model, our goal is to have the parties have that conversation and have the mediator not be making any kind of decisions. Other mediation models might use an evaluative mediation model where the mediator is giving their own opinion and making recommendations to the party, but we don't do that. All of CCR's mediators are trained to have the parties give their own ideas. If a party in mediation were to say to me, well, what would you do in this situation? My response would be, what I would do or what I would think doesn't matter because I'm not the one who's in this situation and I can't give you that advice. What do you think about it? Really turn it back to them. And so one of the core beliefs at CCR is the idea that people who are experiencing the conflict are the ones who are best positioned to resolve it. And while sometimes they might need the assistance of legal aid or other things in order to navigate systems around them, navigate access to other social services that may be useful for resolving the underlying conflict, having the people who are actually having that experience getting to talk to one another can lead to them having realizations about the position that one another is in. I've been in mediations that have been really contentious where the parties haven't really been listening to each other, but I've also been able to either case manage or myself mediate cases where the parties really came to a better understanding of the position the other was in, understanding why the case had to be filed, why a tenant may have been having trouble paying rent, what their plans are going to be for doing things in the future. And so they came in saying, oh, we don't really communicate, we don't really have much of a relationship. And they come out be better prepared to communicate on what they're going to do moving forward. Even if they haven't fully resolved the underlying dispute, they may be coming out with a plan for here's how we're going to continue our conversation moving forward so that we can reach that resolution in the future.
I think a follow-up to that, because you stated the process as we at our center look at those in conflict as the ones most necessary to have the conversation, as if that was unique, and it shouldn't be unique for NAFCM.
I don't think it is.
Yeah, okay. Because it's very much the focus of the Civil Rights Act that founded us, that it's those in the disturbance, the disagreement, that need to be the ones who direct it. And one of my questions when you were talking about seeing if people were ready for community mediation is, are they ready to listen? And am I ready to create the space where they can be brave? And I think for me, successful community mediations, my job is to help create that space where they can be brave. Their job is to listen to each other and then figure out where they want to go. So, and I'm thinking you're shaking your head, yes. with that, what do you do to help create that space? Because you're having people at a very emotional moment. They may be losing the only apartment they've known for years. They may be losing an apartment where their children will have to go to a different school than where they went, and that's a huge disruption for children, so on. How do you create the space where people can be brave to be that vulnerable, and for the owner of the property, the one that is being paid rent, that they can be brave too and say what their needs are? What do you do to create that type of brave space?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things that we do to create spaces like that. I think some of the work comes up front during the intake conversations we have when someone is talking about, I'm interested in mediating, what is that going to look like, so that we can clearly explain to them what that time is going to be, and asking questions of if there's anything that it would be helpful for us to know about the situation before the mediation starts. We had a mediation referral recently where we didn't learn until the mediation had started the depth of the relationship that the parties had, because it wasn't obvious to us from how it came through court. It wasn't necessarily flagged by legal aid. I don't remember in that particular case if both parties spoke to legal aid before the mediation occurred, but we didn't get all the information we had that could have set up the parties better for success. And so, that's an outlier of a case. Most often we're able to get that information, but that's something I emphasize to my team of why, making sure that we have that full understanding of what's going on for the parties so that they're set up for success. And that kind of space can be created for them. And if it seems like we wouldn't be able to offer that to them, then being able to assess on our end of, is there anything that we can do, or should do differently that's within the means of our organization that might better set the parties for success. And then in the mediation itself, making sure that the parties have that space created clearly, both parties giving, clear opening statements so that they have room to put their own information on the table uninterrupted, setting agenda items in a mediation model that I feel like is probably not unfamiliar to the audience for this podcast, but I think that there's a reason why models like that are as consistent as they can be across different organizations, is because thanks to work of groups like NAFCM and our ability to share resources, we all know techniques that work and try our best to make sure that we are using them and building upon them in creating those spaces.
If I may, before I give the mic back to you, Damon, first, I want you to sit with that maybe what happened in those cases really are successes, that you created the brave space for them to actually reveal the depth of their relationship, that previously, no matter how good your intake worker was or how good the legal service attorney may have been, as the former legal service attorney, you created that space. So I just want you to sit with that. Perhaps it wasn't, wow, we missed something, but let's look at what we did to help those people actually be honest about the depth of that relationship that they weren't brave enough to be early on. So first, I want to praise you for that, as opposed to seeing it as, wow, we missed something, because I bet you didn't. I bet you created the space they needed. The second thing, just a curious question you may not know, how do you define success? Because you said, well, you know that, I apologize, 50% of our cases are successful. And so, of course, I got sad for the 50% that isn't, because that's 50 families without homes, and 50% of your families without homes, without roofs over their head. So I'm curious how you define success.
That is a good question, and I think the better thing to do for me to rephrase my earlier statement. 50% of the eviction referrals that we mediate result in a written agreement. That's not the same as our metric for success. We would consider a mediation successful if it results in the parties getting an agreement at some point, whether in the mediation or post-mediation. But 50% of the mediations lead to a written agreement in that mediation there. But we are, we very much emphasize to our mediators, to our staff, to our parties, that coming out of this session with whether or not you have a written agreement is not a metric of success within that.
Thank you. I'll turn it back to you, my friend Damon. Thanks for letting me cut in the dance and have some time with Jim.
Oh, no, we appreciate it, and appreciate you, DJ, and your questions, and Jim, your thoughtful and precise answers. But yes, I mean, far as what I'm hearing with the model that you guys are using, there's some flexibility, and then there's, it's comprehensive. You have different ways you can go, and different, like you were saying, if you can't find the solution or the issue here, then you have different services that you can bring in. And I believe that's really a benefit, I would say, of the model. Are there any other benefits that just come to your mind that stick out when it comes to the facilitative model that you had mentioned?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest benefits is the fact that because you're having the parties have those conversations, it does a lot of work for addressing power imbalances. And some of those power imbalances can come from the nature of the relationship between the parties, because there is a big difference between a landlord and a tenant. And some of that can come from the difference between whether or not a party is represented in court and they're navigating the system. Because in a mediation, a party might show up and it might be the actual named party in the case. It might be the party and their lawyer. It might be just their lawyer. But we try to create a space where parties who aren't represented by attorneys feel like they can have a conversation with an attorney that represents the other side, or with the other side and their attorney present, and feel like everyone is being heard and everyone's opinions are being respected. And I think that that does a lot of work for creating those sorts of spaces like DG mentioned, where once they feel like they've been heard, then they feel like they've been able to get their story off their chest and maybe find themselves in a position where they're willing to negotiate a resolution that they weren't before the process started. And so I think that that ability to address power imbalances is one of the best things that mediation can offer for anything coming out of, whether coming out of a court process or not. My particular program is obviously very court focused, but it's certainly not the exclusive thing that CCR does. But I think having mediation of any model, but especially I think that conversation-based facilitative mediation does that work really well.
Super, super, super. Well, as always, the time flies by. Jim, we just thank and appreciate you for coming on. And as we always say, you kept it 100, and you've given our audience some nuggets of wisdom, some insight, especially concerning this facilitative model and using community mediation to help resolve the eviction disputes. So, DJ, is there any last thing you want to share or tell Jim before we leave today?
No, I just want to make sure people can get a hold of Jim. Jim, would you mind just shouting out your email address for our listeners?
Yeah, if anybody wants to contact me, then it's Alrutz at ccrchicago.org. ccrchicago.org is the best website for anything related to our program, which I think is the majority of your audience. But if there happens to be anybody listening who is trying to get in touch with ERP for other things, then cookcountylegalaid.org is the best broad website for the program.
Thank you.
All right. You guys have heard it. Go and check them out. We thank you for tuning in to #Here to Here, keeping it 100. Once again, this was Jim Alrutz out of Chicago, Illinois. I'm Damon, and my co-host was DG, and we appreciate you tuning in. We're signing off, and we'll see you soon.